Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading is Chapter 248. Chapter 248. From an unfinished house on the Vavarka, the ground floor of which was a dram shop, came drunken shouts and songs. On benches round the tables in a dirty little room sat some 10 factory hands. Tipsy and perspiring, with dim eyes and wide-open mouths, they were all laboriously singing some song or other. They were singing discordantly, arduously, and with great effort, evidently not because they wished to sing, but because they wanted to show they were drunk and on a spree. One, a tall, fair-haired lad in a clean blue coat, was standing over the others. His face, with its fine straight nose, would have been handsome had it not been for his thin, compressed, twitching lips and dull, gloomy, fixed eyes. Evidently possessed by some idea, he stood over those who were singing, and solemnly and jerkily flourished above their heads his white arm with the sleeve turned up at the elbow, trying unnaturally to spread out his dirty fingers. The sleeve of his coat kept slipping down, and he always carefully rolled it up again with his left hand, as if it were most important that the sinewy white arm he was flourishing should be bare. In the midst of the song, cries were heard, and fighting and blows in the passage and porch. The tall lad waved his arm. "Stop it!" he exclaimed peremptorily. "There's a fight, lads!" And, still rolling up his sleeve, he went out to the porch. The factory hands followed him. These men, who under the leadership of the tall lad were drinking in the dram shop that morning, had brought the publican some skins from the factory, and for this had had drink served them. The blacksmiths from a neighboring smithy, hearing the sounds of revelry in the tavern and supposing it to have been broken into, wished to force their way in too, and a fight in the porch had resulted. The publican was fighting one of the smiths at the door, and when the workman came out with the smith, wrenching himself free from the tavern keeper, fell face downward on the pavement. Another smith tried to enter the doorway, pressing against the publican with his chest. The lad with the turned-up sleeve gave the smith a blow in the face and cried wildly, "They're fighting us, lads!" At that moment the first smith got up, and scratching his bruised face to make it bleed, shouted in a fearful voice, "Police! Murder! They've killed a man, lads!" "Oh, gracious me! A man beaten to death! Killed!" screamed a woman, coming out of the gate close by. A crowd gathered round the blood-stained smith. "Haven't you robbed people enough, taking their last shirts?" said a voice addressing the publican. "What have you killed a man for, you thief?" The tall lad, standing in the porch, turned his bleared eyes from the publican to the smith and back again, as if considering whom he ought to fight now. "Murderer!" he shouted suddenly to the publican. "Bind him, lads!" "I dare say you would like to bind me," shouted the publican. Pushing away the men advancing on him, and snatching his cap from his head, he flung it on the ground. As if this action had some mysterious and menacing significance, the workmen surrounding the publican paused in indecision. "I know the law very well, mates. I'll take the matter to the captain of police. You think I won't get to him? Robbery is not permitted to anybody nowadays," shouted the publican, picking up his cap. Come along then, the publican and the tall young fellow repeated one after the other, and they moved up the street together. The blood-stained smith went beside them. The factory hands and others followed behind, talking and shouting. At the corner of the Morskaya, opposite a large house with closed shutters and bearing a bootmaker's signboard, stood a score of thin, worn-out, gloomy-faced bootmakers, wearing overalls and long, tattered coats. "He should pay folks off properly," a thin working man with frowning brows and a scraggly beard was saying. "But he sucked our blood, and now he thinks he's quit of us. He's been misleading us all the week, and now that he's brought us to this pass, he's made off." On seeing the crowd and the blood-stained man, the workmen ceased speaking, and with eager curiosity, all the bootmakers joined the moving crowd. "Where are all the folks going?" "Why, to the police, of course." "I say, is it true that we've been beaten? And what do you think? Look what folks are saying." Questions and answers were heard. The publican, taking advantage of the increased crowd, dropped behind and returned to his tavern. The tall youth, not noticing the disappearance of his foe, waved his bare arm and went on talking incessantly, attracting general attention to himself. It was all around him that the people chiefly crowded, expecting answers from him to the questions that occupied all their minds. "He must keep order, keep the law. That's what the government is there for. Am I not right, good Christians?" said the tall youth, with a scarcely perceptible smile. "He thinks there's no government. How can one do without government? Or else there would be plenty who'd rob us." "Why talk nonsense?" rejoined the voices in the crowd. "Will they give up Moscow like this? They told you that for fun, and you believed it. Aren't there plenty of troops on the march?" "Let him in, indeed. That's what the government is for. You'd better listen to what people are saying," said some of the mob, pointing to the tall youth. By the wall of Chinatown, a smaller group of people were gathered around a man in a frieze coat, who held a paper in his hand. "En ukase! They are reading en ukase! Reading en ukase!" cried voices in the crowd, and the people rushed towards the reader. The man in the frieze coat was reading the broadsheet of August 31st. When the crowd collected around him, he seemed confused, but at the demand of the tall lad who had pushed his way up to him, he began in a rather tremulous voice to read the sheet from the beginning. "Early tomorrow I shall go to see His Serene Highness," he read. "Serene Highness," said the tall fellow with a triumphant smile on his lips and a frown on his brow. "To consult with him to act, and to aid the army to exterminate these scoundrels. We, too, will take part," the reader went on, and then paused. "Do you see?" shouted the youth victoriously. "He's going to clear up the whole affair for you. In destroying them, and will send these visitors to the devil. I will come back to dinner, and we'll set to work. We will do, completely do, and undo these scoundrels." The last words were read out in the midst of complete silence. The tall lad hung his head gloomily. It was evident that no one had understood the last part. In particular, the words, "I will come back to dinner," evidently displeased both reader and audience. The people's minds were tuned to a high pitch, and this was too simple and needlessly comprehensible. It was what any one of them might have said, and therefore was what an ukase, emanating from the highest authority, should not say. They all stood despondent and silent. The tall youth moved his lips and swayed from side to side. "We should ask him. That's he himself?" "Yes, ask him indeed. Why not? He'll explain," voices in the rear of the crowd were suddenly heard saying, and the general attention turned to the police superintendent's trap, which drove into the square attended by 2 mountain dragoons. The superintendent of police, who had gone that morning by Count Rasputin's orders to burn the barges, and had in connection with that matter acquired a large sum of money which was at that moment in his pocket, on seeing a crowd bearing down upon him, told his coachman to stop. "What are these people?" he shouted to the men, who were moving singly and timidly in the direction of his trap. "What people are these?" he shouted again, receiving no answer. "Your Honor," replied the shopman in the frieze coat, "Your Honor, in accord with the proclamation of His Highest Excellency the Count, they desire to serve, not sparing their lives, and it is not any kind of riot, but as His Highest Excellency said, the Count is not left, he is here, and an order will be issued concerning you. said the superintendent of police. "Go on," he ordered his coachman. The crowd halted, pressing around those who had heard what the superintendent had said, and looking at the departing trap. The superintendent of police turned round at that moment with a scared look, said something to his coachman, and his horses increased their speed. "It's a fraud, lads! Lead the way to him, himself!" shouted the tall youth. "Don't let him go, lads! Let him answer us! Keep him!" shouted different people, and the people dashed in pursuit of the trap. Following the superintendent of police and talking loudly, the crowd went in the direction of Lubyanka Street. "There now, the gentry and merchants have gone away and left us to perish. Do they think we're dogs?" Voices in the crowd were heard saying more and more frequently. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 248. I hope you enjoyed it. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 248. Laws for Leadership. Edmund Burke once wrote that the deliberations of calamity are rarely wise. When you combine this insight with Sherlock Holmes' dictum that one must never insensibly twist facts to suit theories, you get the disaster for Moscow that are Count Raspachin's broadsheets. Raspachin, working under the duress of an imminent French invasion, and wishing the Russian position to be much stronger than it actually is, writes these broadsheets encouraging Muscovites to remain in the city and fight for its liberation. Luckily, most ignore this nonsense. Unluckily, some take his advice. The foul results of remaining in Moscow will be made clear in the immediate chapters. Today, however, things are just getting started. Already we have trouble. Men have invaded a bar and started drinking. It's probably not the wisest decision to introduce alcohol consumption into an already volatile situation. Predictably, fights break out. The fighters stumble over the police superintendent. Along the way, their march snowballs into a rowdy crowd. When the superintendent realizes there is no calming this mad crowd, he makes his escape. Then it dawns on those who have remained that they've been duped. "There now," voices in the crowd shout, "the gentry and merchants have gone away and left us to die. Do they think we're dogs?" When the people start asking themselves these questions, it's probably not too long before the ruling class has a problem on their hands. In this particular case, the ruling class, here represented by Count Raspachin, must take all of the blame for what's about to happen in Moscow. He has exercised his authority poorly. With the publication of his broadsheets, he displays dishonesty and disregard for the well-being of those he governs. Luckily for us, there is an alternative model of leadership available from a man, our boy Marcus, whose life, according to Edward Gibbon, was the noblest commentary on the precepts of Zeno. He was severe to himself, indulgent to the imperfections of others, just and beneficent to all mankind. That sounds like someone worth listening to. Daily Meditation. A man should always have these two rules in readiness. The one, to do only whatever the reason of the ruling and legislating faculty may suggest for the use of men. The other, to change thy opinion, if there is any one on hand who sets thee right and moves thee from any opinion. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 248 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening with me today. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we'll be reading and reflecting on chapter 249 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.